May 14th, 1983, a California Highway Patrol officer pulls over a Toyota Celica for reckless driving. Behind the wheel, a well-dressed businessman, seemingly harmless. But in the passenger seat, something's wrong. His companion is unconscious, possibly dead. What unfolds from this traffic stop will shock investigators. A scorecard, bodies scattered across multiple states, and one of the most prolific yet lesser-known serial killers in American history. Today, I will tell you the story of Randy Kraft, the Scorecard Killer.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Spouse-icidal Tendencies. I'm Darrell, and this is my wife, Valery.
Hi.
And episode 6?
I think so.
Man.
I should probably start numbering my notes at the top so we can keep track of that.
Yeah.
It's going a lot faster than I expected it to.
Yeah, it goes fast every week.
Yeah.
Putting out a new episode.
Yeah. I like it though. We got a lot of material out there. I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, it'll be fine. People are crazy. There's always going to be stories. So, a little birdie told me that you have planned another serial killer episode for me.
A little birdie told you.
Okay, you did.
Or you demanded I do a serial killer.
Yes, I wanted a serial killer episode, but you still pulled some of your bullshit and you picked one that I know nothing about.
No, and the fact that you don't know anything about him is wild because
that's crazy to me too. But you were just saying last night though that it's kind of a lesser known.
It is, but I don't understand why.
It's nuts, yeah.
Because we did Ed Kemper and he had 10 victims?
Mm-hmm.
This guy's got at least 60. Why don't people know more about him?
Yeah, I had never even heard of him until you brought it up.
See, I had, but it still has never been one that's stuck out in my head, but I think that's probably going to change after this. Yeah.
All right, well, you want to get into it?
Yeah, and we'll have to just kind of see how it goes, because this is this one's big. There's so much to this one. So
it might potentially be a two-parter?
Yeah, hopefully not. I hope that it goes just smoothly enough that we can get it all today, but we'll just see how it looks, and if we need to turn it into a two-parter, we will.
All right. Well, let's go then.
Okay, so today we're talking about Randy Kraft, the Scorecard Killer. So Randy Stephen Kraft was born March 19th, 1945. That makes him a Pisces. And I would just like to say he does not represent the rest of us. He was born in Long Beach, California. He was the youngest of 4 children and the only son of Opal Lee Beale and Harold Herbert Kraft. Shortly after the United States entered World War II, Harold moved from Wyoming to California, where he found employment with the Douglas Aircraft Company as a production operative. And then he moved his wife and 3 daughters out there. And then Randy was born later. So that's how they ended up in California.
Production operative. That sounds like a really fancy way to say factory worker.
Maybe building planes or something. Douglas Aircraft Company.
Production operative. I think I'm going to suggest that for work.
Well, look though, it's at an aircraft company, so no matter how much they tried to jazz it up, it's still probably pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Way cooler than our production work.
Right. So they lived modestly, and Opal worked to help support the family. She was a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory and a cook in a local school, but she was still a very present mother. She always found time for her kids. Harold was kind of the opposite, kind of an absent father. He wasn't really ever at the family gatherings, and later he'd be described as being distanced from his family. But Randy, being the baby of the family and the only boy, he was kind of babied and doted on by his mother and his sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Often called a mama's boy. but he was also known to be very accident prone, apparently. He was always getting hurt. In
That sounds like another mama's boy that I know.
Shut your mouth. All right. In 1948, the family moved from Long Beach to Midway City in Orange County. They lived in a Women's Army Corps dorm room on Beach Boulevard, and it had been renovated into a 3-bedroom house. The family was very active in the Westminster First Presbyterian Church, and Opal was the chairman of the Deacons Committee. So they were super active in church. Randy attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mom served on the PTA. His teachers noticed at a very young age how smart he was. When he was 12 years old in 1957, he was determined intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at the high school, and his IQ was 129. So
What's genius level?
Not quite, but I think it's pushing
almost.
It. Wasn't it like 135? I think was genius
like
level. We learned that one, didn't we?
Yeah.
So he went to Westminster High School, and he played on the high school tennis team and played saxophone. Like, it sounds like he's just like a big nerd, you know, like exactly the kind of guy that you want your kid to be.
Except maybe not.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. So starting early on in high school, he got very interested in politics. He was a big time Republican. And while in high school, he founded the Westminster World Affairs Club, and he dreamed of being a senator. He was pleasant and bright. You know, sometimes he'd have a girlfriend here and there, but classmates and teachers later who have talked about him said that they always kind of suspected that maybe he was gay. And he has said that he did know in high school that he was gay, but he kept his sexuality a secret at first. You know, it doesn't really go with the religious Republican background that he had. So
yeah.
He ended up graduating high school in 1963, 10th in his class of 390 students. In the fall of 1963, he enrolled at Claremont Men's College. He pursued a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. While he was in college, he joined the ROTC, and he would regularly attended demonstrations in support of the Vietnam War. He regularly attended campaign rallies for Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. Later, he has stated that his second year of Claremont was when he kind of abandoned that last little bit of the Republican ideology. So at this point, things kind of start turning around for him when he decides that maybe he's not as conservative as he thought he was. So he kind of had this like epiphany that maybe the life that he was living was just what he was doing because he felt like that's what his parents wanted him to do, what he was supposed to do. And he was kind of just living in a simulation. So that same year was the first year that he entered into his first homosexual relationship. In 1964, he began working as a bartender at a Garden Grove cocktail lounge that was widely known to have a lot of gay clientele. He'd often travel to Laguna Beach and Huntington Beach to have casual sex with hustlers, which are male sex workers. He'd bring several friends home with him, like his friends home with him. He would take these male sex workers to his parents and introduce them to his parents, like hoping that his parents would like catch on that he was gay without having to tell them.
Complete denial.
Yeah, his parents and his sister remained oblivious completely to his sexuality in the beginning. So in 1966, he was arrested for lewd conduct. He had propositioned an undercover cop in Huntington Beach. He didn't have any kind of a record at that time, so they decided they weren't going to charge him with it. They didn't end up filing any charges. Like, oh, you've never done anything before, so we're not going to charge you. Like,
for one freebie.
Right, I guess, apparently. So this, like, around this time, he has this radical shift in his political beliefs, and he becomes a huge supporter of liberal views. And then by the year 1967, he actually registered as a Democrat. So now he starts being a Democratic Party organizer. Instead of all these rallies he's doing for the Republican, he's completely flipped it. He actually campaigned for Robert F. Kennedy's election and received a letter from Bobby Kennedy thanking him for his efforts in campaigning for him. Around this time, he also starts engaging in high-risk behaviors, doing drugs, drinking heavily, gambling. He would like host all-night gambling sessions, like card poker with the other students. He kind of got off on this like instant gratification of winning money, and he was kind of like going to the full extreme to prove who he was as a person and show like, okay, all this that I pretended to be, that's not who I am, and now I'm going to be me in my loudest form. Randy started to put all of his studies on the back burner. He was busy, partying and having sex, and he decided that finding himself was more important than school, and he ended up failing that year, and he wasn't able to graduate when he was supposed to. So he had to end up taking another economics class, and it ended up postponing his graduation by 8 months. So he graduated from Claremont Men's College in February of 1968. That's when my mother was born, with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. June of 1968, Kraft joined the United States Air Force. He did his basic training in Texas, and he was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California. So he didn't really get far from home. In the Air Force, he supervised the painting of test planes. He was very good at discipline and order, and he was very successful in the Air Force. Like the order of it all worked really well for him. He rose to the rank of Airman First Class and a Supervisor Manager. So the year that he was promoted to Airman First Class was when he decided to come out to his family. He had written a letter to a friend about coming out to his family. And in this letter, he stated that his dad flew into a rage. His mom was a little more understanding, but she was also disapproving. His family ended up ultimately accepting his sexuality, but his sisters claim that he started distancing himself after coming out. He did stay in contact with them, but he wasn't as close as he had been before. July 26, 1969, Kraft comes out to his supervisors. And this is not something you could do in the military back then.
Yeah.
So they gave him a general discharge after only 13 months in the service. His dismissal was listed as medical. He actually went to an attorney for legal advice to challenge the grounds regarding his discharge. The Air Force refused to change the status of the discharge. So at this time, he moves back home with his parents, and he started working as a bartender at a gay bar called The Mug. So while working at the bar, after close, Randy would often hook up with random men. In March of 1970, Randy met a 13-year-old boy named Joseph Alvin Fancher at Huntington Beach. He invited him back to his car to have a beer. Joseph told Randy that he'd run away from home that day, and so Kraft invited him to come back to his apartment with him. He told him that he could live with him in his apartment, and that he even knew a woman that the boy could have sex with. So the boy went back to his apartment with him, and while he was there, Randy drugged him with Valium. He gave him marijuana alcohol, and then he beat him and repeatedly sexually assaulted him. Joseph was able to escape hours later when Kraft went to work the next morning. So he just beats the hell out of this kid and then takes off to work the next day like nothing happened.
Sounds kind of like, isn't that a similar situation with Jeffrey Dahmer? He held some young kid.
Yeah, and the kid got out and ran out
yeah.
to the street. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and similar situation, because there was actually a passerby that noticed the boy. He was looking drugged and disheveled, so they called him an ambulance. They took him to the hospital, and he had to have his stomach pumped. Fancher told the police at the hospital that Kraft had given him drugs and beaten him. He did not admit that he was sexually assaulted because he was embarrassed. But the fact that he admitted that he took the drugs willingly, there were no charges filed.
Wow.
So he basically just got away with it. In 1971, Kraft became a forklift driver in Huntington Beach and enrolled at Long Beach State University, majoring in education. While attending school there, he met Jeff Graves, who was a fellow teaching student, and they began a relationship. So now we are in the year 1971, and this is where things really kind of take off for Mr. Kraft. Between the years of 1971 and 1983, Kraft is believed to have killed 67 people.
Jesus.
Male victims ranging from 13 to 35 years old, the majority of them being in their late teens and early 20s. He was charged with and convicted of 16 homicides. And from here, what we're going to do is kind of go into the victims.
Okay.
So when Kraft was caught, they found a scorecard, hence the name, the Scorecard Killer. On this, it had 61 different entries that were just kind of codes. So we'll get more into that later, but some of, as I'm like kind of going through the victims that he for sure that we know that he killed.
Like the 16 he was convicted of?
Yes.
Is that,
okay. There may be some mentions of what those were on the scorecard, but we will get more into that later. So I just wanted to mention that before we get into all of it. The way that I did my notes is very strange, and I started them months ago, so...
This was originally going to be our
second episode. And then I got into it, and I was like, my goodness, this is a lot. So at this point, we're going to kind of start going through a timeline of how this all played out. Now, and some of these you'll see as we go. So this first one was actually, it was his first suspected murder victim, was Wayne Joseph Duquette. And that was October 5th, 1971. The police find the nude body of Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old Long Beach resident, discarded near the Ortega Highway. Wayne was a bartender at the gay bar The Stable and had gone missing on September 20th, 2 weeks prior. So the body was too decomposed at that time. They weren't able to tell if there was any foul play in the death. But they ended up ruling it as acute alcohol poisoning due to a high blood alcohol level. They knew he was very drunk, and that's all they really knew. But when they found this scorecard, the first entry on it said stable. So that's made the investigators think that was tied to the gay bar, The Stable. So next we have Edward Daniel Moore. He was a 20-year-old Marine. He was last seen leaving the barracks at Camp Pendleton on December 24th, 1972. His body was found 2 days later in the early morning hours of December 26th near a ramp off the 405 freeway in Seal Beach. His body had abrasions, and it was clear it had been pushed from a moving vehicle. His autopsy showed that he had been bound at the wrists and ankles, and he was beaten in the face with a blunt object and strangled with a garrote. His body had several bite marks, and he had a sock forced into his rectum.
Jesus.
The next victim was an unidentified male, estimated to be between the ages of 17 and 25. This body was found on February 6, 1973, alongside the Terminal Island Freeway in Wilmington. They had been strangled with a ligature and also had a sock in the rectum. Kevin Clark Bailey was 17 years old, and he was found beside a road in Huntington Beach on April 14th. He had been sodomized before being murdered, and his penis had been removed. There was another unidentified male youth. His dismembered body was found in Wilmington on April 22nd. Ronnie Jean Weeb, 20 years old. He had left his mother's house to go to the bar and disappeared. His strangled body was found beside an on-ramp of the 405 freeway on July 30th, 2 days after he had gone missing. Vincent Cruz Mestis was a 20-year-old art student. His body was found on December 29th, 1973 in San Bernardino Mountains, and he also had a sock forced into his rectum. His hands were severed from his body and they were never found. By November 1974, there were 5 more victims that had been found beside freeways and major roadways in Southern California, 3 of which investigators were able to link to the same killer. 2 of them, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies. 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson had bite marks on his body, not unlike some of Kraft's earlier victims. So he may have murdered them. It may have been a copycat killer. But John William Laris was a 17-year-old high school student. He was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach, January 3rd, 1975. His body was found the next day at Sunset Beach with a foreign object shoved in his anus. Drag marks along the beach near his body may suggest that 2 people had carried his body into the water. So we'll get more into that later, but that's something interesting to note.
Okay.
Craig Janitis was 21 years old, and his body was found in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. He'd been strangled to death with a string and possibly a shoestring. So all these murders were spread basically over 4 different counties, over 3 different years. And so it kind of took the investigators a little longer to start piecing it together. But once they had 14 victims that they had linked in one way or another to one killer. So at this point, they know that they're looking for a serial killer. So some of the victims were gay, but they were all like vulnerable in one way or another. So there were different ways. It seems like probably that he got these guys' attention. He offered them a place to stay. Maybe he offered them sex. Maybe, drugs, whatever it was they were looking for. He,
Right.
that's how he did whatever he needed to kind of pull them in. All of the victims were Caucasian males, and they had similar characteristics. There were a lot of Marines. Every one of them had high levels of alcohol and tranquilizers in their system, which indicated they'd been unconscious when they were abused or killed. The majority of the victims, they came to the conclusion, had been lured to his vehicle with the offer of a ride or a cigarette, and then he would proceed to start feeding them alcohol and drugs. All of them were bound, tortured, and sexually abused before they were killed. And they were killed by asphyxiation, strangling, or bludgeoning. Some of the victims had digested lethal doses of prescription medications. And there was one victim that had been stabbed to death, but there were enough of the other, MO, like they could tell that it was still from the same person. So these were all the things that made them finally tie this together. Many of these victims, they were all tortured in different ways. There were several that had been burned with car cigarette lighters. And usually when they had been, it was around their genitals, their chest, and their face. Several of the victims were found with foreign objects inserted into their rectums. There were many of them that had actually been emasculated, where he cut off or mutilated their genitals. And some of the bodies were dismembered.
So I feel like this is definitely the scorecard aspect of it, the way that they were either killed or tortured. Does that have
that
something to
definitely
do?
does. It
Yeah.
does. It's not, it's
There's a
part of it
pattern.
because,
There's
well,
a
there's
pattern to
different.
it.
So the majority of these murders had been committed in California, but there were some that were actually in Oregon and even two in Michigan. At this point, when they realize, that he's kind of all over the place, they got homicide investigators from several different counties in Southern California, and they came together and met in Orange County to kind of come up with, put everybody's head together, see what kind of progress they'd made in looking for this guy, and come up with a game plan for trying to find him.
This guy had his own task force created.
Exactly. No, for
Jesus.
sure.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So that an FBI profile was read to investigators describing the killer as methodical, organized lust killer of above average intelligence who exhibited an indifference to the interests and welfare of society. Sounds like he nailed it to me. He said that this person may have had prior run-ins with the law or had even possibly spent time in a mental facility. Some of the investigators at that time had said that they believed that the murders may have been the work of more than one person, that whoever this was, they weren't working alone. They thought that this person or people possibly had a military background. And the reason, like how they came to that conclusion, was that two of the victims had paper residue in their nostrils. So I guess it's a procedure that they use in the military to prevent bodies from purging after death. They said that the inserting the socks into the rectum may have been used for the same reason, to keep him from purging when he took them to wherever he was taking them. But at this time, investigators had no solid suspects. So, next victim, Keith Crockwell. March 29th, 1975, Kraft lured the 19-year-old Keith and a 15-year-old Kent May from a Long Beach parking lot where they were drinking with a group of friends into his Ford Mustang. He gave the boys beer and Valium and drove aimlessly around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. A little later, some of the other boys that they had been hanging out with in the parking lot said that they had seen a distinct black and white Mustang pull into the parking lot and stop. The driver leaned across, opened the passenger door, and pushed an unconscious but otherwise unharmed Kent onto the pavement and then drove away. The friends noticed that Keith was still in the car and he was slumped on the driver's shoulder. May 8th, Keith's skull was found on a jetty near the Long Beach Marina. The rest of his body was found 6 months later. The two friends suspected that the murderer was a patron of the Shore Bar, which is that gay bar that had been connected to other victims. So they kind of took it into their own hands to begin searching the area to see if they could find the Mustang that Keith had been seen in. They ended up actually finding the car less than a mile from their house. They wrote down the license plate and took it to the police. And the vehicle was registered to Randy Kraft. So in May 19th, 1975, the Long Beach police actually questioned Randy. He denied initially ever meeting either of these boys. Of course, the police did not believe him, so they took him back to the station to talk to him more. At that time, he admitted that he came across the two boys in the parking lot. He told the police that he persuaded the boys to drink alcohol and take Valium with him while he drove around. He said that he took May back to the parking lot and drove to a side road with Crockwell where his car got stuck on an embankment. He said he left the boy in his car, walked to the gas station to call a tow truck, and that when he had come back to his car that the boy had gone. Kraft's roommate at the time actually corroborated that Kraft had called him and told him that his car was stuck. So he had, I don't know, I guess his alibi, but the police were still kind of like, this just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Two of the detectives tried to file homicide charges against Kraft. They ended up being denied due to the coroner's conclusion that from the autopsy of the remains that had been recovered, so at this time, all they had was the skull, he said he had determined that the boy had died of an accidental drowning. So they weren't able to charge him. At this time, there appears to be about a 7-month pause in the killings. Was this because, the police were maybe onto him?
He was
Trying to
being
lay
watched.
low. Yeah.
Yeah.
So December 31st, Kraft abducted 22-year-old Mark Hall. This was kind of known to be the worst of all of his murders. He had driven him to a canyon in a remote area and tied him to a tree. The medical examiner listed his official cause of death as asphyxiation from all of the leaves and dirt that were in his trachea. He had been sodomized and his penis removed and shoved into his own rectum.
God.
He had burns on his chest, scrotum, nose, and cheeks from a car cigarette lighter, and this same lighter was actually used to destroy his eyes. He had incisions on his legs that had been created with a broken bottle. The forensic experts were able to actually determine that he had been alive for most of the torture that he went through. So by 1976, Randy and Jeff Graves had ended their relationship, and he had began a relationship with a 19-year-old apprentice baker named Jeff Seelig. The couple moved together to Laguna Hills. Neither Randy or Jeff found themselves to be monogamous, but they did believe that their relationship was permanent. So they were committed to one another, but it seems like maybe they had an open relationship. I saw your fly.
Yeah, it's driving me fucking crazy. Sorry, guys.
So Seelig had later told investigators that he and Kraft would regularly pick up hitchhikers and proposition them for threesomes. It was always consensual, and Seelig always stayed adamant that Kraft was never violent towards him or showed any violent tendencies. It's believed that the relationship with Seelig was a contributing factor in why there seemed to be like a lull in murders. So the next known killing was in December of 1976, December 10th. Paul Joseph Fuchs, 19 years old. He was last seen outside Ripples, which was another gay bar in Long Beach that Kraft frequented. His body was never found, but was listed on the scorecard. Then there was a 16-month lull in his killings at this time. January 3rd, 1978, the investigators from the different counties reconvened to check in on progress and finding out who the killer was. The police were now certain that there was more than one active killer in the area at the time. In July of 1977, police arrested Patrick Carney, who had confessed to the murders of 28 young men and boys. He had dissected and discarded their bodies in trash bags along California freeways. Kraft had dismembered some of his bodies. He never shot them in the temple the way that Carney had, and Carney had not tortured his victims in the way that Kraft had. So the police knew that there had to be another killer even after they had arrested him.
Yeah.
So Scott Michael Hughes was an 18-year-old Marine. On April 16th, 1978, he was drugged on Valium before having his scrotum cut open and one of his testicles removed.
Jesus.
He was strangled to death with a ligature and discarded, fully clothed, besides his shoelaces, on the side of a ramp in Anaheim. So I'm sure it was his shoelaces that he had used to strangle him.
Yeah.
Ronald Gerald Young, 23 years old. June 11th, 1978, his body was found near a San Diego freeway. He had been emasculated and stabbed to death. He had abrasions on his body that indicated that he was pushed from the car at a high speed. Richard Allen Keith, a 20-year-old Marine, was last seen June 19th, 1978, by his girlfriend in the city of Carson. He was found on the side of a road on Moulton Parkway. He had welts on his wrist, indicating that he had been bound before being strangled to death with a ligature. Froth in his throat indicated he was drowning as a result of flurazepam and alcohol that he consumed prior to being strangled. He's believed to be Maureen Carson. He was in Carson on his scorecard. Keith Arthur Klingbeil was a 23-year-old hitchhiker. He had ingested large amounts of acetaminophen and alcohol before being strangled and his body discarded on the side of Interstate 5 freeway. He was alive when he was found, but he died shortly after being admitted to Mission Community Hospital. His autopsy revealed that his nipple had been seared with a car lighter. Richard Anthony Crosby was a 20-year-old hitchhiker. He had disappeared while hitchhiking home from a theater in Torrance on September 29th. He had been suffocated and his left nipple had been mutilated with a car cigarette lighter. He was found 200 yards north of Highway 71 in San Bernardino. Michael Joseph Inderbeaton was a 21-year-old truck driver from Long Beach. He had been castrated, sodomized with a foreign object, and suffered burns with the automobile cigarette lighter. His cause of death was suffocation. He was found along an on-ramp to the I-605 on November 18th, 1978. At this time, there was an eight-month lull. Lonnie Harold Kreisel was a 20-year-old Marine. He was killed June 16th, 1979. His cause of death was listed as acute alcohol poisoning, but he had a rope and burn marks from being bound and tortured prior to being thrown from a moving vehicle on the 405 freeway.
A lot of Marines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's right there in that there's Marine bases out there in Southern California. Keith Anthony Jackson was a 21-year-old English tourist. He was killed August 29th, 1979. He was actually dismembered with a sock inserted into his rectum. He was discarded in 2 trash bags in a cardboard box behind a gas station in Long Beach. He'd been dead for several days when they found his remains, which was only his head, his torso, and a left leg, and the rest have never been. Gregory Wallace Jolly was 19 years old. September 14th, 1979. He was found in Lake Arrowhead. His head, penis, and legs had been removed after death. His possessions were actually later found in Kraft's house. Jeffrey Sayre was a 15-year-old assumed victim of Randy Kraft. He was kidnapped from a bus stop in Westminster on November 24th, 1979, while returning home from a date with his girlfriend. The bus stop was near Kraft's parents' house, and there was a scorecard entry that matched that said Westminster date. Mark Allen Marsh was 19 years old. He was a Marine. He was hitchhiking towards Buena Park. He was found decapitated and his hands removed near the Templin Highway on February 18th, 1980. In the summer of 1980, Kraft went on an extended business trip to Portland, Oregon. He did return to California in August, but he is believed to have killed 2 men while in Oregon. There were 2 entries on his scorecard that included the word Portland. Michael Sean O'Fallon was a 17-year-old boy from Denver. July 17th, 1980, he was hitchhiking across the U.S. and Canada before starting college in the fall. Like bucket list things. He had alcohol and Valium in his system at this time of his death, and he had been strangled. His body was found nude and hogtied 10 miles south of Salem, and he was listed on the scorecard as Portland, Denver. His camera was found in Kraft's home later. Elk was the other scorecard entry. July 18th, 1980, was a man between the ages of 35 and 45. He had ingested a toxic amount of Valium and Tylenol and was strangled with a ligature. He was found beside a freeway in Woodburn. And I wonder what the thing is with the Tylenol.
Yeah,
why Tylenol? Because that's a couple times now. I don't know what the purpose. I mean, obviously, like enough of it could kill you, but I don't think that it would have an effect prior to that. I don't know. It doesn't.
Yeah,
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's kind of odd.
So Robert Wyatt Loggins was a 19-year-old Marine. His body was found in a trash bag near the El Toro Marine Air Base on September 3rd, 1980. He had last been seen by two fellow Marines close to the Pacific Coast Highway, September 23rd, 1980. Photographs and the negatives of the victim, both fully clothed and slumped on his sofa, appearing to be intoxicated, and naked in pornographic positions. His eyes were closed in all the photos, so it's unknown whether the victim was alive or deceased at the time that the photos were taken. April 9th, 1981, Michael Cluck, a 17-year-old hitchhiker, was hitchhiking from Kent, Washington to Bakersfield, California. His body was found the following day beside Interstate 5 freeway near Goshen, Oregon. He had 31 blunt force blows to the back of his head. He had been sodomized, beaten, kicked, and scoured. So they're believing the entry for Michael Cluck was Portland blood, likely due to the large amount of blood that was at the crime scene. The day his body was discovered, Kraft was seen at a Lane County hospital to receive treatment for his toe that was presumably injured while kicking his victim.
Jesus.
Christopher Allen Williams, a 17-year-old male sex worker, August 20th, 1981, was found partially clothed in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested phenobarbital and benzodiazepine. Then these are downers that are used to treat anxiety and depression, and sometimes
I'm
seizures.
familiar.
Yeah. He had tissue paper large deep in his nostrils, causing him to choke to death on his own mucus.
Jesus.
So by 1982, Kraft's relationship with Selig was suffering due to the many work trips, and it was causing them to fight often. So they began weekly counseling appointments in Huntington Beach, June 22nd, 1982.
Boy.
So Raymond Davis was a 14-year-old from Pittsburgh, California, was found decaying next to the Rampart Boulevard off-ramp on the Hollywood Freeway on July 29th, 1982. And someone had done like kind of a half-assed job trying to cover his body with soil and leaves. So this is, in the Huntington Beach area. Like now they're going to counseling there.
Mm-hmm.
And now bodies are showing up there. His remains were actually found by a Caltrans, like the California DOT, basically, employee they were receiving complaints from the residents in the area that there was a foul odor. So they went out to check it out and found his body. So he was found the end of July. He was last seen June 17th. Which was 42 days prior. He had been looking for his missing dog. His wrists had been tied behind his back, and he was strangled to death with his own shoelace. His presumed scorecard entry was dog. Robert Avila was a 16-year-old that was found by the same crew just 40 feet away from where Davis's body was. He'd been strangled with a stereo wire, and his body was well into decomp, and he'd been missing for over a week. He had another little lull for 5 months. And then Arnie Michael Lane was a 24-year-old from Modesto. He was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. He was abducted and murdered November 1st, 1982. His body was not found until January of 1984. So 14 months later. It was on a hillside near the town of Ramona. Brian Witcher, 26-year-old that had been dumped out of a moving vehicle in Wilsonville, Oregon on Interstate 5. He had high levels of alcohol and Valium, but his official cause of death was asphyxiation. Anthony Jose Silvera, a 29-year-old carpenter who was hitchhiking towards Medford on December 3rd, 1982, and his body was found 2 weeks later. He had been strangled and sodomized with a foreign object prior to his death. At the time of Witcher and Silvera's death, Kraft was in Oregon on business, and it ended the day that Silvera was killed, December 3rd. The next day, Kraft traveled from Portland to Seattle to visit friends, where he was seen wearing a military jacket with the name Silvera.
Shit.
December 5th, 1982, he flew from Seattle to Grand Rapids, Michigan on business. December 7th, he meets cousins Dennis Alt, 24, and Christopher Schoenborn, 20, at a seminar in the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel, where he was last seen talking to them in the lobby before midnight. Their bodies were found December 9th in a field close to the hotel in sexually suggestive positions. They both had high levels of Valium and alcohol. They were sodomized. Alt died of asphyxiation, and Schoenborn had been strangled to death with a ballpoint and had a ballpoint pin shoved into his urethra.
Oh, God.
The scorecard entry for these two was GR2, Grand Rapids 2. Schoenborn's keys and Silvera's military jacket were left at the hotel that he had been staying in. December 8th, 1982, he traveled to Portland, and within the first 24 hours of being there, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs, who was last seen hitchhiking to a relative's home in LA December 8th. His body was thrown next to the same rural road in Clackamas County where Witcher's body had been recovered 2 weeks earlier. He had consumed Valium and alcohol, but died from a sock being shoved into his trachea. So investigators kind of noted the amount of time that were happening between these killings in the other states. So they kind of theorized that the killer probably lived in California and was just traveling to Oregon on business, which, is...
Nailed it.
Yep. The investigators in Oregon decided that they would reach out to other states to see if anybody else had victims that matched the MO of their killer. And they got response back from Southern California very quick. They're like, the pattern of these killings is identical to what we've got going on here in California. So at that time, the 6 murders that Randy Kraft had committed in Oregon had been linked to his murders in California.
Mm-hmm.
January 27th, 1983, Eric Church, yet not the same one, was a 21-year-old hitchhiker. He was hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento. His body was found along the I-605 with high levels of Valium and alcohol, and he had been sodomized. He had rope marks that indicated that he had struggled against restraints until he died of strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. So Jeffrey Nelson, 18, and Roger Duvall, 20, were last seen outside a friend's house shortly after midnight when they told their friend that they were going to get something to eat. Nelson's body was found nude, emasculated, and had been thrown from a moving vehicle near an off-ramp near Garden Grove Freeway. Duvall's body was found the following day on a mountainside by Mount Baldy in San Bernardino County. He'd been tied up, sodomized, and strangled with a cord. Both Nelson and Duvall had high levels of alcohol and propranolol in their system at the time of their death. May 14th, 1983, at 1:10 a.m., 2 California Highway Patrol officers stopped a Toyota Celica under the suspicion that the driver had been driving under the influence after erratic driving and an illegal lane change. The driver stopped the vehicle and exited the car, and he poured out a beer as he did. His pants were unbuttoned, and he identified himself as Randy Kraft. So one of the officers did a field sobriety test, and the other officer checked the vehicle. Upon going up to the passenger side of the vehicle, the officer noticed there was a young man slumped in the passenger seat of the car, and he was partially covered with a jacket. There were empty beer bottles and an open bottle of prescription lorazepam, scattered at his feet.
Shit.
The officer tried to wake the passenger, kind of shook his arm, and realized, oh, this guy's cold.
Oh, no.
So he checked for a pulse and realized at that time that he was dead and he had ligature marks around his neck. So he moved the jacket and realized that the man's pants were unbuttoned and his genitals were exposed. His wrists had been bound with a shoelace. The victim was 25-year-old Terry Lee Gambrell. He was a Marine stationed at El Toro Air Force Base, and he had been strangled to death. So initially, Kraft was arrested on charges of driving under the influence of alcohol while they kind of continued to gather evidence. In the back seat, they found the belt that matched the bruising around the victim's neck, alcohol, tranquilizers, and various prescription drugs and stimulants. The carpet had been completely saturated with blood that was confirmed to be human, but Gambrell had no open wounds. So I think immediately at that point they're like, oh, so this can't be the only guy. When they pulled the carpet up, they found an envelope that had 50 photographs of young men in pornographic poses. In many of the photos, the men appeared to be either asleep or dead. In the trunk, they found a 3-ring binder with a handwritten coded list with 61 entries. They searched Kraft's home and found many personal items of men who had been murdered over the last decade. Fibers from a rug that had been matched to a murder victim, and the couch in his home matched the couch that was in the photographs had been found in the car.
Yeah.
They found a roll of film that had photos of Eric Church and Roger Duvall sitting in Kraft's car. And in one of the photos, you could see ligature marks on Duvall's neck. So this scorecard, there were 61 entries, and each of the entries were believed to refer to either a specific murder or a double murder. Some of the entries refer to the victims' names or sometimes the way they were killed, or where they were last seen, or where they were dumped. So some of the entries that were on there were EDM. So that would be one by the name Edward Daniel Moore. Vince M for Vincent Mestis. Marine Head BP was Mark Marsh, and he had been decapitated and was last hitchhiking towards Buena Park. So the BP is Buena Park Head because he decapitated him. Craig Janitis, who was dumped at the Golden Sails Hotel, was Golden Sails. The entries indicated a minimum of 4 double murders. The GR2 that I mentioned before with the cousins that were last seen in Grand Rapids. 2-in-1 Beach was Jeffrey Nelson and Roger Duvall. 2-in-1 Hitch and 2-in-1 MV to PL that hasn't been linked at this time to any double murders or disappearances, or hadn't been linked. So none of the investigators have been able to link any of the entries to Eric Church or Terry Gambrell, which would have been his last 2 victims. It is possible that Eric Church was listed in a way that investigators just weren't able to connect to him. They didn't, but it's also possible that Gambrell wasn't on there because he hadn't disposed of him yet to put him on there. So basically the scorecard lists a minimum of 65 and possibly 67 victims.
God.
So on May 16th, 1983, was formally charged with Gambrell's murder. Over the next 4 months, investigators interviewed over 700 witnesses and collected over 250 physical pieces of evidence connecting Kraft to 15 additional homicides between December 1972 and February of 1983. He was formally charged with these 2 plus 2 counts of sodomy and 1 count of emasculation on September 8th, 1983. So his trial began September 26th of 1988 in Orange County before Judge Donald A. McCart. So the prosecution, I just kind of broke these down between the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution called nearly 160 witnesses and had over 1,000 exhibits that they introduced as evidence. And some of the things that they entered were bloodstains, hair and fiber evidence found at Kraft's home and in his car, fingerprints from glass shards found at the Hall murder scene, photos showing men dead, drugged, or asleep, the belt used to strangle Gambrell prescription drugs, and a buck knife that was found in his vehicle. They had work and travel records that placed Kraft in the locations where victims had been gone missing or been discarded. They found numerous personal possessions in Kraft's home that belonged to these murder victims. The defense side of things tried to offer alibis, give alternate suspects. They dismissed evidence as being circumstantial. They portrayed Kraft as an articulate, hardworking, upstanding member of the community. They did not dispute that these men had been murdered, just that the fact that they had been murdered by Kraft. Obviously, somebody killed them. It wasn't this guy. They pointed out to the investigators that they had originally believed that the victims belonged to two other serial killers, Patrick Carney and William Bonin. They said that there was no concrete evidence that it was Kraft. The trial lasted 13 months, and it was the most expensive in Orange County history, which seems crazy to me because isn't that like you would think that they probably got some pretty expensive trials out that way. So the closing arguments were opened by both sides on April 29th, 1989, and they lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 11 days and found Kraft guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation on May 12th, 1989. The jury came back together June 5th of 1989 to hear the testimony from the prosecution and the defense regarding the penalty that they were going to give for his crimes. The prosecution pointed out that there were other murders committed across several different states that they were sure were committed by Kraft. The defense called this highly speculative. Basically, they're saying, like, these are what we're bringing to you that we can 100% prove that he did, but we're sure that he's done others as well. Yeah. The defense introduced results from a PET scan conducted on Kraft that revealed abnormalities in the frontal lobes of his brains. And so they claimed that this reduced his ability to control his impulse and emotions. And the prosecution basically came back and said, there's nothing wrong with this guy. Like they said, there's nothing wrong with Mr. Kraft's mind other than he likes killing for sexual satisfaction. They said that the only reason that his family and friends couldn't believe that he had committed these murders just further proved what a good salesman he was. I found an article from November of 2023, and it seems like there may be an open investigation at this time. So maybe he's going to go back to court. Maybe this has all just been drug out because they're still linking.
That's murders. Insane. Like, yeah, that's crazy. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And at this point, what do? You go back to court and get convicted and get sentenced to death again?
Yeah.
Like you can only die once.
Yeah.
And he's been in there longer than I've been alive.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I guess not, but close, you know.
Pretty close,
like,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I guess he was. He just wasn't convicted until years later because, yeah, he was arrested in 1983. He's been in prison way longer than he was out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know. Isn't that wild to you that you don't know about this guy?
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe I've never heard this guy's name before.
Yeah. Well, see, like I had heard of him. It just, like I said, like it never really stuck, but it's a pretty big one.
Yeah, I'd say so. My goodness. All right, well, we ready to wrap this thing up?
I'm ready for bed.
Yeah, I think it's bedtime.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys, well, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. If you want to support the show, give us a review if you're watching on Spotify, or like, comment, do all the things on YouTube. Still trying to grow the show more. Still not on Apple Podcasts. We're getting there. It's still on my honey-do list. I'll get it done.
Yeah,
Promise. You will. Yeah. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Come and interact with us on our socials. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Yeah, if you
get really excited to see new people on things.
We do. She likes new friends. She's a big fan. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Next week on Spouse-icidal Tendencies, he called himself a prophet. His followers called him a father, but what Marcus Weston built wasn't a church. It was a twisted cult rooted in incest, control, and bloodshed. He claimed to worship God, but in the end, he committed one of the most horrifying family murders in California history. Join us as we unravel the dark and delusional world of Marcus Weston and the house of horrors he called home.